oh no, it's cool, man. Like, it's cool. I like gay people. Oh, that's so awesome. I love gays. Thank God you're here, because today we're giving you guys a video that you've been asking for since pretty much we started our YouTube channel. And we're going to be talking about the difference between being a gay couple living in the US and a gay couple living in Denmark. So let's get started.
Yeah, we had a few preconceived notions before we moved over to Denmark, but we didn't know all that much. I mean, we knew it was a progressive country. We quickly found out with our visa situation that we could get visas together even though we weren't married and we're just living together as cohabitating partners. So it seemed like it was a pretty open place, and we really thought it was going to be a good place to be gay.
Yeah, and we moved over. The process started in 2016, and that was less than 18 months, maybe a year after gay marriage was legal in all 50 states in the US. And a lot of those states were still fighting it in court and not too happy about it. So we knew automatically that since we were treated the same as a heterosexual couple that was trying to immigrate to Denmark, we were treated exactly the same way. And that right away let us know that this was a more progressive country than the one we were leaving.
Yeah, so that was our first impression of Denmark, but now we've lived here for 4 years and we have a lot more opinions about this.
One of the nicest things about being a gay couple in Denmark versus being a gay couple in the United States is that in Denmark, people are just kind of indifferent to it. They literally could care less whether you're gay or straight. And it's also not the default. So in America, it's heteronormative, meaning that it's still thought of as the default that you are heterosexual. So if you're something other than straight, it can be something you need to constantly tell people, explain to people, and you don't necessarily want to talk about your sexuality every time you meet a new colleague. But the nice thing about Denmark is that people don't assume that, and people find ways to put it out there and ask that question without seeming like they're being intrusive or making you uncomfortable.
And on top of that, we find the language here tends to be a little bit more gender inclusive. What we mean by that is that if we have a colleague talking about how their daughter is a picky eater, what they'll say is something like, oh, I feel really bad for her future boyfriend or girlfriend because she's a real picky eater. Just casually noting that it could be one or the other. Maybe she'll date a boy, maybe she'll date a girl. We find the same thing in our experience too. When we meet new colleagues or friends or whatever else, people will ask us, oh, do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Again, not assuming one or the other, just asking both. And we do have to say that may partly be because of the Danish language, because the word for boyfriend and girlfriend is the same. It's kæreste, gender neutral. In fact, when we were in Danish classes, that's one of the first things that you learn how to say. Hvad hedder din kæreste? What's the name of your boyfriend or girlfriend? For me, it was easy. The answer is Derek.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that when people do ask you that question and you answer them, they're not going to respond with something like, oh no, it's cool, man. Like, it's cool. I like gay people. Like, dude, way to go. You should be okay with that. I'm not hitting on you by being me, right? And you don't have girls being like, oh, that's so awesome. I love gays. Like, I'm not here to entertain you either. And sometimes you have these like awkward reactions, not all the time, but sometimes you have these awkward reactions in America when you tell somebody that you're gay. And it's really nice to not have to constantly do that in Denmark because it comes up casually. People ask you, it's not a novelty, and then you move on to the next conversation. And when it comes to PDA, it seems like Denmark and Europe in general are a bit more comfortable with public displays of affection for any couple, but it's never something that we shy away from. We feel pretty much the same level of comfort walking around holding hands in Denmark as we would in Philadelphia, but that's also because we came from a pretty progressive city in the United States, and we've kind of always lived in cities by choice.
Yeah, it's not to say that we haven't been glared at in the US in different places, and sometimes you're in certain situations where you feel a little awkward being two guys walking on the street together. But definitely we felt a lot less of that in Denmark. Now, all that's also to say, I'm sure there are people who are homophobic that are in Denmark as well. Everywhere has them. But it just seems like to us like it's not nearly as overt as you hear people talking about it in the US. And certainly we've never, I think, had a single situation that made us feel uncomfortable since we moved here 4.5 years ago.
Yeah, so it is maybe a little bit better in Denmark. I think probably every gay couple in the US has had somebody yell a derogatory name or slur at them out of a moving car window. It's just something that happens in the US, and I don't know. It just, of course it bothers you. It doesn't not bother you. But you can't wallow in it, you know? And it's nice that that's not something that happens in Denmark. In the US, you kind of get used to the idea that you're going to live around people that hate you for no reason, and you get over that really quickly. And unfortunately, some people don't, and that's why people that are in the LGBTQ community in America have higher suicide rates and things like that. But it's just something that unfortunately you do have to deal with and live with. Now, maybe we just don't understand enough Danish to know if people are yelling slurs at us in Denmark, but I don't think that's the case. Now, we hear that in Denmark, in the rural areas, there is more of a quiet and private homophobia, and that's definitely different than in the United States, where, as described, there's a lot of people, especially even politicians, who have no problem broadcasting their hatred for the LGBTQ community. And that brings us nicely to the topic of politics and the political landscape around LGBTQ rights in both countries. But before we can get into that, we're going to walk over to the National Museum and check out some of their exhibits to help put some of these topics into context. Okay, Mette, can you tell us a little bit about the exhibit that we're in front of now?
Right now we are in the National Museum of Denmark, and we are standing in the exhibition that is covering newer or modern history in Denmark, so the time from 1600 till 2000. And actually we have to reach 1970s before we even meet the term homosexuals. And that is also because in the 70s we see that the gay liberation movement was established. And of course at this time gay people wanted to fight for their rights because they haven't got the rights as the rest of the society. Until 1973, it wasn't legal for two men to dance in public in Denmark.
Wow.
And of course, they wanted to fight that. You could also see that if we look at history, until 1981, we still regarded homosexual as a disease, a mental disease in Denmark. So like only 40 years ago, we removed that from the list of mental illnesses in Denmark.
Wow. That's a lot of parallels to the way the movement was in the US at that time too, with laws that were punitive towards homosexuals, but really just kind of to keep them separate from other things in society and other people in society.
Yeah.
And that at that time there was so much radical change in organization, even though there were LGBT people before that they really organized for their rights in that same period of time in the US as in Denmark.
Yeah. And I guess you could also say, I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened in the 1970s, because at this time you would see that everything could be discussed and debated in society. We have women walking on the streets demanding equal pay. We have the town Christiania established in Copenhagen as a place where free spirits could go and live outside the rest of the society. So everything could be debated. And of course also they have had a main focus on how to simply just free sexuality. And that was of course also regarding other sexualities.
Sure. And again, it's another interesting parallel, because it's the same thing in the 70s in the US. It was communal living and women's rights and all of these social changes happening in parallel. So very interesting to learn about here. Yeah. Well, why don't we go and meet Mike over in the 1980s, and we'll see how things kept going.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
So Mette, we've gone through and seen how gay liberation started in the 70s. How did it continue in the 80s in Denmark?
A lot of things happened in Denmark in the 1980s. As I just mentioned, homosexuals were removed from the official mental illness list. But also Denmark really became famous because we were the first country in the world to allow gay people to get married in city halls. And the first couple in Denmark, it was the 1st of October 1989, was Axel and Ejgil, who were married. And like the whole city were in a total fuss. And the world press was also, everyone gathered around taking photos. So I think that was actually a very crucial point, that like Denmark became well famous for its gay rights at this time. But again, also, if you had to look at history, it wasn't until 2012 before gay people were allowed to be married in a church in Denmark. And still today, priests can refuse to marry gay people or divorce people if they don't feel like it. So I guess you could say that in the 80s, a lot of positive things happened. But of course, also Denmark was, like the rest of the world, also experienced HIV. And a lot of the things that people actually were fighting for in the 70s with free sexuality, free love, you should be able to love whoever you want to, that was actually, you could say, almost paused at this time. Because also in Denmark, people were kind of scared because they didn't really know much about the disease. They were like, oh, can I get HIV from peeing in the same toilet as a gay man, or even kissing with him? So actually a lot of campaign was also made for like, you should definitely have sex with whoever you want to, but please make sure to use a condom. That you saw all over the media also in the 80s, because people were afraid at this time, and it didn't do anything good also for the gay community.
Very interesting. So the focus in Denmark during the AIDS crisis was on education. Was there any kind of retribution against gays in that period, or did things continue to grow slowly as we got to the apex of the marriage in 1989?
Yeah, actually it just like kept on growing. Also we have like in the 90s, you had like the debate on should gay people be able to adopt and so on. So actually it just kept on with the talk about how should we make sure that gay people have the same rights as everybody else.
What a wonderful approach.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Mette, thank you so much for taking us around the exhibits in here, and there's some phenomenal things on display here at the National Museum that you definitely should check out.
So from our visit to the National Museum and our time with Mette, we kind of learned that in Denmark, the march towards LGBTQ rights was slow and steady over the last 50 years. But in the US, it was something different.
Yeah, in the US, it seemed like it was a mix of ups and downs. After Stonewall in 1969, most of the 70s was a period of progress and growth of acceptance for the LGBTQ community. But then by the 1980s, there was a pretty significant backlash due to the rise of the Christian right and the demonization of gays during the AIDS crisis. During the 90s, things got better. But then by the time we get to the 2000s, gays were once again pawns in the culture wars in the name of traditional values because of a fight against the potential for gay marriage. Today, the 2010s saw a lot of progress where we got gay marriage in a lot of states that offered a lot of rights towards LGBTQ community against discrimination. But even today, there's all kinds of laws that are being passed, particularly against people that are transgender, and also laws that are allowing people to discriminate openly, all in the name of religious freedom.
That's right. Today, the Republican Party in the United States has introduced and passed anti-LGBTQ legislation in state after state after state. And it's mostly targeted against transgender people. But the second they could repeal gay marriage, they would. The irony of that, though, is that gay marriage is polling higher than ever at almost 70% in the United States, 10 points higher than the day that gay marriage was passed by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, one of the interesting facts is even among Republicans, some polls have had over 50% there, showing that there is a path to progress even in the US.
Right, so clearly their politicians are trying to stoke culture wars instead of acting on the will of their constituents. Because of that, transphobia is on the rise. There have been over 27 transgender people murdered in the United States this year alone. And don't forget, it's during a time where most people aren't even leaving their house. Even the Republican Party at the state level in our home state of Pennsylvania voted unanimously to keep homosexuality in the state's obscenities laws.
And while it's not as bad as Pennsylvania and other parts of the United States, Denmark's kind of fallen behind as well. And it's not kept up with its Nordic neighbors in things around trans rights and gender identity in particular.
Yeah, so all things considered, I definitely feel a bit more comfortable politically because I'm not used as a pawn being somebody who's gay in Denmark. But, that doesn't mean that I don't still care about my LGBTQ brothers and sisters in the United States.
Okay, so we've talked about the heavy stuff like the history and the politics. It's time to talk about parties. What's it like being social in Denmark? One of the big things that we notice is that Copenhagen actually has a lot fewer queer spaces than we're used to back in Philadelphia or other larger American cities. Part of this is probably because Denmark's a bit more progressive, and so maybe there's not as much of a need for these sorts of queer spaces here, as people are very comfortable being anywhere and don't need to be on their own.
Yeah, and you can see that happening in some American cities as well, where there are fewer and fewer gay bars because it's almost just not necessary. Because traditionally a gay bar was almost like a community meeting space, and now that's not really necessary to meet people, and they're spaces that are welcoming to the entire community all over the city. Another difference that we notice is in gay sports. So we belong to the Gay Sports League in Copenhagen, and we also belong to the one in Philadelphia. And one thing that I notice is that in American gay sports leagues, they tend to center around drinking, bar culture, and they're much more social in nature. And going out with your teammates either before, after, and sometimes having a drink during games. But in Denmark, it's a much more serious league, and the games really are the focus. In fact, it's centered around the sport itself, and that's a bit different.
But with still some queer spaces here and also gay sports leagues, we've been able to make all kinds of gay friends here in Copenhagen, just like we did in Philadelphia. And I'm sure this would be a little bit of a different experience if you go out of the larger cities like Copenhagen or Aarhus or maybe some of the university cities in Denmark. But all in all, we found people to be quite social and really easy to meet other people.
Now, one thing that combines the social and the political, 2 points we've covered in depth, is pride. So pride has always been a big thing for the LGBTQ community. And one thing we love about living in Denmark is getting to celebrate pride in Copenhagen. It's a bit different than pride that we've celebrated in other cities in the US because it's really driven around everybody in the city or even everybody in Denmark. It's not as much about the gays and the gay area of the city and the gay bars, which tends to be the way prides are centered in the United States.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things is that Copenhagen Pride really feels like a civic pride. It's a chance for the whole country and the whole community to feel proud about the values about tolerance and equality that we have here in Denmark.
Yeah, one of the most touching things I remember, one of the first 2 years that we were living here, I was working for a guy who told me about taking his daughter to Pride. And she was only, I think, 5 or 6 years old. But he said that he was taking her to the Rainbow Parade because rainbows are something that makes everybody happy. And in Denmark, we think that everybody should be happy. And that was how he explained to his daughter that they were going to the Pride Parade. And he said, yeah, of course, I'll explain it to her more in detail. But she's 6 years old, so she needs to remember this, and that's the spirit behind Pride. To me, that was just incredibly touching and really moving. And that's kind of how everybody in Denmark feels. It's almost like Pride is for Denmark for the fact that Danes are so accepting and progressive when it comes to LGBTQ rights. Of course, it's for us gays a little bit too.
So Copenhagen, Denmark is routinely named one of the most livable places in the world and is well known for its LGBT freedom. So you can tell we love living here.
Yeah, and if we were asked to move for work to a different country or even other places in the United States, we probably would have hesitated a little bit. So we're really proud of where Denmark is as far as LGBTQ rights because we feel it every day. And just one other disclosure, we are keenly aware of the fact that as cisgendered white males, we do have it a little bit easier as gay people living anywhere. But overall, we just want to wish everybody a happy Pride Month. And we're so happy that you guys are with us. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel if you want to hear more content about what it's like to live in Denmark. We put out new videos every Thursday. And if you're interested in getting any of the Pride swag that we're wearing, if you need it for Pride, you want to look your best, you can find links in the description and make some purchases there. Thanks, guys.